US inflation has increased by the highest rate it has been in the last 3 years. That is the latest findings from the Commerce Department, which released the Personal Consumption Expenditures Index, or PCE, for April of 2026. A bit of note about the PCE, this is actually the Federal Reserve's preferred measurement of inflation, and I'm happy to go into more details why that is. And in this report, the Commerce Department found that inflation increased year over year by about 3.8 percentage points. That 3.8% year over year rate is up from the 3.5% rate in March of 2026 and the 2.8% year over year rate in February of 2026. Now, if we net out food and energy prices, which as we've seen over the last year tend to have pretty volatile inflation rates, core PCE is about 3.3%. Now, if we look at both core PCE as well as regular PCE, what's interesting, right, is that we have assumed over the last several months that the main driver of prices, or the increase in prices, has to do with the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and how that subsequently affects energy. And while that is true in this report, we are also seeing increases in the prices of other types of goods, namely housing and utilities, recreation services, as well as food services, which, yes, could be directed towards the rising increases in prices of energy, but doesn't necessarily need to, right? We are seeing the prices of other goods increase, and all of this together, right? The rising rate of inflation for goods across the board, alongside another number that was released in this report, which is the annual personal income growth, which only rose by about 2.5%. means that the prices of goods, right, are rising faster than wages, which means that consumers are losing significant purchasing power, which explains the declining consumer sentiment, which is at the lowest level we have seen in the last 50 years. And I've said this time and time again, right? Inflation itself is not the main culprit here, right? If wages are increasing faster than the rate of inflation, people's purchasing power still increases. It's when we have this exact situation where the prices of goods are rising faster than people's wages and their purchasing power declines is when we see a real cost of living crisis. This is actually the first PCE report that has been released since Kevin Warsh assumed the position of the chairman of the Federal Reserve earlier this month. And it puts him in this very interesting position, right? Because we are seeing inflation rise over time, which would signal to the Fed that they need to keep interest rates high, right? When you keep interest rates high, you limit the amount of money supply that's in the economy, while at the same time, the person who first appointed him, the president, basically has said time and time again he wants to have lower interest rates in order to stimulate business through lowering borrowing costs, right? But when you keep interest rates low, that ends up exacerbating inflation, which puts Kevin Warsh in this really interesting position, right? What exactly to do about interest rates? And this is all the more complicated given who appointed him, which is the US president. From an economics perspective, it's very clear looking at the rising rate of inflation, coupled with some inflation that we are anticipating down the road, right? The effects of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz on the prices of fertilizer, which therefore could increase the price of food. All of that together, coupled with the fact that the person who is essentially the person who appointed him, right, why he has this job, has made it very clear that he wants to keep interest rates low. And that is going to be a very interesting showdown, especially as the Fed plans on meeting next month. So we will just have to see what happens. And for now, that's all I got. If you have any questions, let me know.